All right, let's continue with our study of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, written by Moses, a man between the age of 80 and 120 years old at the time that he wrote them. And our story continues now. This is the second major episode, right after they have been led out of Egypt, the most powerful nation in the history of the world. In fact, those giant pyramids at Giza, they're already over 1,000 years old when Moses leads the people out. The Israelites didn't build those pyramids. They were way old. They were old when Abraham had been there. So now, the people are being led out by this crazy 80-year-old man. They've been through the plagues and the Passover, and at the end of the Passover, Pharaoh encourages them to go. They plunder the Egyptians. They actually take gold and dishes and clothing and all kinds of things from the Egyptians. And when they walk out of Egypt, they're actually armed for battle. The soldiers are armed for battle. But God understands that they're not ready really to face a serious battle yet. This is a day of joy. It's the beginning of their whole new life. But God doesn't take them on the direct route to the promised land, because that would have them come into the land of the Philistines. And God says if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. And so instead, God leads them around through the desert and to a place that's very remote. By day, Yahweh went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud, and by night in a pillar of fire, so that they had light at night, and they could actually travel in day or at night, which was, they didn't have electric lights or anything then, so traveling at night was scary and weird anyway. But so this was an amazing thing, and again, God distinguishing himself from all other kinds of gods. And then God says something to Moses. God says to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp between Migdol and the sea. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around in the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. I will harden Pharaoh's heart and he'll pursue them, but I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know. The Egyptians will know that I am Yahweh. So the Israelites did this. This is interesting. Yahweh is revealing his strategy to Moses before he does it. So here they are, a couple of days or whatever out of Egypt, and God is already telling Moses, I'm going to make it look like you guys are wandering around out here, but so that Pharaoh will feel free to come after you. Well, sure enough, as soon as Pharaoh realizes that the people are gone, they change their mind and they say, what have we done? We've let perfectly good slaves go free, and we don't have anybody to do our service for us. And so he gets his chariot and his army and all his commanders ready, and they go out in hot pursuit. Now, the Israelites are camped, and they see the Egyptians coming off in the distance. Up till now, they marched out with boldness. They had plunder. They're dressed for battle. And then they look up, and over their shoulder, they see this dust cloud off in the distance, and it's the Egyptians coming after them with a full army. And all of a sudden, Moses wrote this. The Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to Yahweh. They said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptian? It had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. And Moses answers the people, don't be afraid, stand firm, and you'll see the deliverance Yahweh will bring on you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. Yahweh will fight for you. You only need to be still. Now that's Moses' answer. Is that the right answer? We hear lots of times, I probably should save this for later, but I can't wait. Have you ever heard people say, be still and wait for the Lord and he will do blah, 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 blah. Listen to what God says when Moses has said, be still. Yahweh says to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so the Israelites can go through on dry ground. I'll harden the heart of the Pharisees, and then he says the same thing again. I harden their heart, they'll come in after you, and it'll bring glory, and Egypt will know that there is a God and that Yahweh is God. And so, sure enough, Moses holds out his staff. The people, scared to death, they're stuck between a giant ocean and this killer army that's beating down on them. And the angel of God, who's been traveling in the pillar of fire and so forth, shifts from in front of them to behind them and has fire shine on their side, cloud on the side of the Egyptians, so that the Egyptians are in the dark all night and the Israelites are in the light. The sea parts, and it's two giant walls of water, and they walk down through on dry ground. It's not moist or muddy. It's not like a breeze just kind of scooted a little puddle out of the way. There's a wall of water on either side of the people as they walk through. Probably 2 million people. And all through the night, these people are going through the sea. Can you imagine? They've got sheep and cows and people, and they're all going through the thing. And Pharaoh's army, meanwhile, is confused. God throws a spirit of confusion into them, and the wheels start falling off their chariots, and they get stuck and confused. And finally, the Egyptian army, during the last watch of the night, they're starting to try to get down into the sea to follow after Israel. And when all this confusion hits, the Egyptians say, let's get away from the Israelites. Yahweh is fighting for them against Egypt. Exactly what God had said. They will know that I am Yahweh. This isn't the people fighting. This is God fighting. And even the Egyptians know that it is Yahweh that's doing the fighting. So then God tells Moses, stretch out your hand over the water at daybreak. All through the night this has gone on. The sun starts coming up, and God tells Moses to stick his rod out over the ocean, and he does, the Red Sea, and he does, and the water collapses in and drowns the entire Egyptian army. Ugh. The Israelites are standing there in shock, watching the bodies of this army floating and washing up onto the shore. The whole army's dead. And then, these great words. That day, Yahweh saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the great power Yahweh displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared Yahweh and put their trust in him. And now, Moses and the people sing a song. It's called the Song of Moses, and you may want to learn this thing. I'm not going to read the whole thing right now, but you might need to learn this. Let me tell you why. This is the song we're going to sing in heaven. The Song of Moses and the Lamb is sung in heaven. Look in Revelation 15. You'll find it there. It says they were singing the Song of Moses and the Lamb, so don't be the only person there that doesn't know the words. It says things in there, they sang things like, I will sing to Yahweh, for he is highly exalted. The horse and his rider is hurled into the sea. It says Yahweh is his name in verse 3 of chapter 15. Pharaoh and his chariots, armies, he is hurled into the sea. Your right hand, Yahweh, is majestic in power. It shattered the enemy. By the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. The surging waters stood firm like a wall. The deep waters congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy boasted, I will pursue, I will overtake them. And they sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who among the gods is like you, Yahweh? See, there's nobody like Yahweh. And then listen to this, skipping down to verse 13. In your unfailing love, you will lead the people you have redeemed. There's that idea of redemption again. Redeemed. Remember when we talked about the Passover and I said a price was paid? Here it is again. And God is now going to lead the people that he has redeemed. Then it says, the nations will hear and tremble. Here's a little side note for you. The nations, the word in Hebrew is goyim, and goyim means nations. Basically there's the Jews, and then there's all the nations of the world. There's us and there's everybody else. It's also the word that we say when we use the word Gentiles. There's us, and then there's the nations. There's the other people. And so when he says here, the nations will hear and tremble, it's not just saying that it's sort of acknowledging that they're the chosen people, that there's us and we're different than everybody else. We're God's people and we have him as a God. And then he names names. Anguish will grip the people of Philistia. That's the Philistines that he didn't want to lead them into battle with right away. The chiefs of Edom will be terrified. The leaders of Moab will be seized with trembling. The people of Canaan will melt away. Terror and dread will fall upon them. Those names are important because they're going to play very prominently as the people of Israel start entering into the promised land. But those names are all names that have been discussed back in Genesis. When you're reading stories out of Genesis and you find out that Lot and his daughters had, Lot had children by his own daughters, or you hear about Jacob and Esau. Esau had his name changed to Edom. The Edomites are descendant of Esau. The Moabites mentioned here are descendants of Lot, which was Abraham's nephew. The descendants of Canaan are descendants of Noah's bad son that saw their dad naked. If you know that those people are who Israel are going to face when they get to Egypt and when they get to the promised land, then the stories in Genesis begin to make sense. They're not just random stories telling about the origins of the world and there was a flood and all that. Of course, those things are true. But there was a reason for those stories for this particular set of people. Okay. I'm going to let you guys take a quick break right now. And hopefully let you look over the text. And I want you to focus on picturing the scene in your mind so that you can get an idea of the kinds of things. I want you to have this image in your mind. And remember what I said about perspective. I want you to try to see it from the perspective of the people, from the perspective of Moses, and from the perspective of God, and even the Egyptians and the other peoples that are mentioned here, so that when we get ready to apply it to ourselves, you'll be able to remember these stories and say, oh yeah, I remember that. I see how that fits with me. Okay? We'll take a 5-minute break, and then I'll talk to you in just a minute. I want you to think back on the image of Moses and the people when the armies of Pharaoh began to attack, okay? First of all, God has told Moses what he's going to do. And so Moses kind of knows that this is about to happen. But then when they get there, the people completely freak out. They're completely filled with terror. But Moses stands strong. Now, he isn't moving forward right at first, but at least he's not scared to death either. Remember how he picked up the snake, even though he was clearly scared of snakes? Remember how he went to Egypt even though he didn't want to go, and he stood before Pharaoh? I want you to think in terms of the difference between Moses and the people, because it tells us something about the kind of people we need to be. Whereas the people are terrified when Pharaoh's army comes, Moses stands firm, even as he stood firm against Pharaoh, this powerful leader. The picture that you can see right now is in a place called Tiananmen Square in China. And back before you guys were born, the communist government in China had experienced an uprising among some of the young people, and they sent tanks in to break the thing up. And one guy ran out there, and what you see is this guy that ran out and stood in the face of these tanks and stopped the tanks standing there. That's Moses. Now the question for us is, who are we going to be? Well, of course, most of us are the kind of people that when the tanks come, we run away. But what we can be with God is the kind of people that stand firm. And let me tell you how we can do this. Remember that it said when God led them out of Egypt, he didn't take them on the direct route because he knew they'd shrivel up and freak out if they faced the Philistines in war. So he took them around a long way and sort of lured the Egyptians out. Listen, God knows what our strengths and weaknesses are better than we do. And we can trust that if we're being tempted, that there will be a way out, that there is a way of escape. The sea will part, something's going to happen, the army will drop dead. But whatever it is in your life that has you stuck, do not let discouragement take over. You look the thing right squarely in the face and you say, I may not be strong enough to whip you, but by God's strength, I'm powerful enough. God's power provides. Listen to what Paul wrote to the Church of Christ in Corinth. This is from 1 Corinthians chapter 10. No temptation has seized you except what is common to man, and God is faithful. He won't let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he'll also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. I want you guys to listen very carefully to this. And I want you to remember it because I want you to be able to remind one another of this reality. You are stronger than you realize by God's strength. But you have to rely on God, not self-esteem, not your own ability, not some how popular you are, cool you are, pretty you are, or anything else, rich you are. Just rely on God and let God deliver you. Another thing that Paul wrote, the one who just wrote this passage, was that God's strength is shown in our weakness. You see, and he said, I rejoice in my weakness, because that's when God's strength shines all the more. When someone looks at you or looks at me and says, boy, if someone looks at me and says, boy, that Kirk, he's not very capable, but he manages to do all these things. How does that happen? And then they say, he must have a powerful God. God's really working in his life because Kirk couldn't do it by himself. That's God's strength shining through my weakness. And so I don't know how things are going to turn out, but I do know this. If I trust in God, they will turn out for the benefit and for the good. When you have friends that are getting discouraged, or when you get discouraged, remember this Red Sea experience. You're between a rock and a hard place, or you're between an army and an ocean. God can deliver you when there is no other way out. And God will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you can bear. So learn how to rely on him. Now take a quick break and we'll be right back. It's time for me to introduce you to a concept that's very abstract, so I want you to stick with me, okay? Put your attention spans together and be ready to learn something. It's really cool, but it's a little bit abstract. In Hebrews chapter 10, the writer writes the following sentence: "The Torah is only a shadow of the good things that are coming, not the realities themselves." The Torah is a shadow, not the reality. Let me tell you what that means. We're talking about the Torah and the stories behind the Torah. And it's only a shadow, it's not real. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. It happened. But it turns out that there's sort of two realms of existence. There's the spiritual realm and there's the physical realm. You and I, we live in the physical world. We can touch things and smell them and taste them and scratch them and all of that. But there is a spiritual realm, and we can't see things there. We believe in it. It's by faith that we understand the spiritual realm. How do we know what the spiritual realm looks like? Well, because God gave us a model. He showed us what it looked like in the physical world so that we could understand what takes place in the spiritual world. Let me give you an example. This right here is my pet monkey. His name is Spanky. And he was given to me by some people, and I like him, and as I do almost all monkeys. You can tell he's a monkey because he looks like a monkey, and because he has a tail like a monkey, and because he has a purple cape like monkeys have. And if you could hear him, he's broken now, but he used to make a sound like monkeys too, and scream cross. Now you noticed I've called my friend here a monkey, but is he really a monkey? No. He's a shadow of a monkey. He's an image of a monkey. He's a model of a monkey. A model of a monkey. If you say that several times really fast, it sounds kind of weird. Model of a monkey, model of a monkey, model of a monkey. All right, now, let me read this from Hebrews again. The Torah is only a model of a monkey. No, the Torah is only a shadow of the good things that are coming, not the realities themselves. Now, I want you to think of what we see in the Old Testament, and particularly in these stories. They're a physical model, like Spanky, but they're not what's real. What's real is what takes place in the spiritual world, the things that are eternal, that last forever. Listen to this from 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Pay careful attention now to what I'm going to read. I'm going to read just a couple of excerpts here from 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Beginning in verse 1. "I don't want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers, that our forefathers were all under the cloud, and that they passed through the sea. They were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God wasn't pleased with them, and these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil." And then skipping down, he says, "These things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the fulfillment of the ages has come." We're going to refer to this section in 1 Corinthians 10 a number of times over the next several weeks. It would help you to just sort of get used to it and kind of know it. You don't have to memorize it, but you should understand this principle that I want you to understand this week. They really did pass through the Red Sea, and they really were slaves in Egypt. But it turns out the whole thing happened to teach us. And here's a weird thing to think about. Also from Paul's pen, the same guy that wrote this in 1 Corinthians 10, he wrote this in a letter to the Church of Christ in Ephesus. Listen to these words. "He chose us," this is God, chose us in Him, that's Jesus, "before the creation of the world, to be holy and blameless in His sight, in love, to be predestined to be adopted as His sons through Jesus Christ in accordance with His pleasure and will, to the praise of His glorious grace, which He's freely given the one He loves. In Him we have redemption through His blood." Do you hear that language? We have redemption through His blood. He is chosen. It sounds just like us being led out of our own little personal spiritual Egypt, slavery to sin, born again, baptized, our sins are washed away, and then we walk a new life, just like Israel. But what this says is that God knew us before the creation of the world. He knew that you were going to be sitting in this class. He knew that I was going to make this little video. And he knew that when he parted the Red Sea. And according to Paul in 1 Corinthians, the whole thing happened to teach us how to live our lives and how God will work in our lives. When you're personally between an army and an ocean, this was meant for you. When you are pondering whether or not to get baptized, understand that everyone has been baptized. God's people got led out of slavery and they passed through this sea and were baptized. And that by this, Egypt was washed off of them. And that the whole thing was set up to work right in harmony, hand in hand, from the very beginning. This thing was meant to work that way. God is real. And he knows you, and he knows me, and he cares what we do and how we do it. And he has given us these stories, not just because they're cool special effects or they're fun stories, or you can watch some cucumber dance through the thing, or I don't know what all that stuff is. But all of these stories are actually a model. They're actually a model to teach us about what's real. You can look at the model and have an idea what the real thing looks like. When you feel depressed and anxious and there's an army coming and you're afraid, think back on this story and understand that God will find a way for you. I know the Lord will find a way for me. There's an old song we used to sing in Vacation Bible School. I don't think anybody sings it anymore. It's still in one of the songbooks, the one at our church. I know the Lord will find a way for me. If I walk in heaven's light, shun the wrong and do the right, I know the Lord will find a way for me. And it's true. May God bless you. And I hope in your concluding discussion that you will see and understand, as we go through this, how to apply these amazing stories to your everyday life. And may God bless you as you go forward and get unstuck. Bye.